Howdy, howdy. We are live on another Friday night, ready to talk about some brand spanking new Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And this is an interesting one to talk about because it's another Pike Lite episode. So we have guest captain Kirk coming aboard.
He's going to
So,
take over the show no matter what. Doesn't
yeah,
matter if it's the 1960s or the present. He's taking over.
so bit of a atypical episode, but that's kind of a standard Star Trek format, you know. So especially with episodic stuff, which is Strange New Worlds whole thing. So yeah, I think it's going to be a neat conversation. I hope people are ready. I see there's folks in the live audience already chatting away. So Dave, let's just go ahead and get the show started if you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Fatheree,
This is Dave.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the dun, 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 247th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast. I'm a big fan of the 47, so it's a little celebratory. This was supposed to be the number we hit on week one with of Strange New World season 2, but Dave and I needed a 2-week break before we started this season. So, but yes, the 247th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek old and new. And tonight, we're talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, written by David Reed, who is a Star Trek newcomer, and directed by Amanda Rowe. So before we get into this episode, and there's a lot to talk about in here. We got Khan, we got Kirk, we got alternate timelines, we got temporal wars, and all kinds of shit going on. But before Dave and I start unpacking it, I'm going to do a little bit of quick housekeeping. First and foremost, want to give a huge thank you and shout out to our Patreon supporters. So thank each and every one of you: Starfleet, Sohel, Kiki's Eternal, Crazy Dutchie, Joanne Robertson, John Dog, Geek Filter, Quarksbar, Ben Ginium, Stephanie Durantes, Matthew Averett, and our anonymous supporters. We like to celebrate our patrons by throwing them a watch party every month. We're doing one July 15th. We're watching the Voyager episode Flashback. We're going to do something a little special because it's a bridge crew level patron. It's their birthday month, and if it's your birthday and you support at the bridge crew level or higher, you get to not only pick what we're watching, but we can do two-parters or Star Trek movies or Star Trek documentaries. And we have a selection to watch the Voyager episode Flashback. That's the one where we see Tuvok back on the Excelsior with Sulu during Star Trek 6. Like, Tuvok had like this whole side story going on in Star Trek 6 that we didn't know about, but he's hanging out with Sulu, he's hanging out with Janice Rand on the Excelsior. Kang shows up, one of Dave and I think both of us, I think I can speak for you, but one of our favorite Klingons in the
Fair to
entire
say.
franchise. And yeah, so we're gonna not only just watch Flashback, but also watch some of the Sulu scenes from Star Trek 6. So that'll be fun. I've never done that. I've never like watched those back to back like that. So yeah, so we'll just do a sampling of Star Trek 6 with, see the opening Praxis explosion, that stuff, and then go into Flashback and see Tuvok's perspective. And you can come into the patron. Sorry, I can't talk. It's been a really long week, but you can come into the Patreon as little as $2 per month. That'll get you into the watch parties, and if you're able to help at a more generous level, there's a lot of other perks too. You can come in at a higher tier. Links to the Patreon in the description wherever you're watching or listening to this. I keep forgetting, like, Patreon is the site and patron is the person. For some reason today, my brain, I have to pause and think about, like, which word to choose. Like,
It would be more helpful if we could call them Patreons.
yeah, so, or just patty cakes. I don't know. That's, I don't know. There's someone more clever than I can come up with some cutesy name off of that. But yeah, there's not like a ton of news. STLV is coming up in about it's really like a month away, basically. Like, it's basically July now, and then it's early August is, I think, August 3rd is when I'm flying. Maybe it's August 2nd. I don't know. But yeah, it's the beginning of August. That first weekend of August, I will be in Las Vegas at the Rio, hanging out with a lot of cool Trekkies and Trekkers. So hope to see you there. If anyone sees me, please holler at me. I'd love to talk Star Trek with folks. So, and also hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy. I'm going to be super obnoxious and continue to remind everyone that, yes, we still need to be making noise about Star Trek Prodigy because it's working. It's working. Aaron Waltke on Twitter is saying, like, oh, keep it up, folks. You know, we're having, there's some conversations going on, and, you know, he doesn't want to, he can't say what exactly is happening, but it sounds like Paramount has noticed that we are pissed. They are removing Star Trek Prodigy. So whenever I have free time, which is very rare these days, my day job has been making me work like a lot of overtime. But whenever I have free time, I just go on Twitter, I look up the hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy, and I'll just start liking and retweeting stuff. One way to get like a lot of attention is whenever Paramount Plus puts stuff on Twitter, you know, like these corporations, they pay social media sites to get priority in the algorithms. So, you know, they're basically ads whenever, you know, Paramount Plus is tweeting about, like, look at this new show coming out, and I'm retweeting all of those with a picture of the poster they made of Dow that said Star Trek Prodigy Season 2 coming this winter, and I'm like, Paramount Plus, how do I know this is actually going to come out? You told me Prodigy was coming this winter, and then you pulled that away from us and took it off the streaming service. So why should anyone actually believe the things you're advertising are coming out? Why should people subscribe thinking that we're going to get these shows when you've set a record of false advertisement? And because those tweets that Paramount Plus does are, you know, kind of pushed to get more engagement, I find when I retweet those that also I just within an hour it'll have, you know, like thousands of views. And so I'm trying to game the system in our favor, but you know, hopefully it's working.
You know, I don't think it's obnoxious, Fatheree. I mean, this is Star Trek has its TOS roots in fan campaigns to save the show, and so we should absolutely be backing it.
Yeah. You know, two years into Star Trek's existence, NBC wanted to cancel the original series after season 2. And that's like the first time anyone ever done this, but like it was a huge fan movement. Yeah, Gene Roddenberry was secretly, you know, helping organize it, but it wasn't him. You know, it was John and B. Joe Trimble did the hard work, and they actually smartly kept Gene out of the spotlight because they're like, no, they need to see that it's us fans doing this and not you. So it worked. They got Star Trek a third season, which was phenomenal. And because it had a third season, because it had that extra 24 episodes, it was actually a viable syndication product. It got a huge amount of syndication in the 70s, and look where we are now. So yeah, this is nothing new. Like, Star Trek fans have moved heaven and earth multiple times before, and you know, sometimes the Wall Street bigwigs that are, you know, making all the decisions about like this media that we love, but it's all controlled by these, you know, corporate powers. Like, you know, of course, like, they don't understand it. They don't get how it works. They don't understand how the fandom works. And when that happens, it's, you know, our duty to roll up our sleeves and remind them. So, you know, make sure that we maintain that momentum. It was a good week, it looks like. I know this is a holiday weekend for those of us in the United States and Canada, which is relevant to this episode we're about to talk about. Happy Canada Day, y'all. But yeah, so make sure that, you know, you stay vocal, stay active, and it is going to make a difference. I can tell. Like, it's either going to be best case scenario, Paramount Plus reverses their decision. I think that's actually possible. I don't want to get people's hopes up, but they might say like, hold on, we need to reevaluate this. Maybe we need to hold on to this thing. We're either going to do that or we're going to get someone else, Netflix or Hulu or someone, to be like, damn, there's a lot of interest on this, cheap little kid show that I can probably pick up from Paramount really cheap, and then all of my viewers are going to love it. So yeah, I'm definitely going to, maybe, possibly someday, get Prodigy season 3. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities, but yeah, it's unfortunate. I think it was like a hasty decision on behalf of Paramount with their merger with Showtime and all of that, and yeah, people who didn't understand the Star Trek fandom and how big of a force we can be doing this. So
it's this, or we're gonna have to go back and change history.
Yeah, well, we'll do some Prodigy time travel to save Chakotay, which is appropriate for that show, right?
Right.
But yeah, so there's some other, I guess there is some Star Trek comics and stuff that I wanted to talk about, but because Paramount has made us focus on the removal of Prodigy, I don't have time to talk about and help them promote, their other tie-in stuff. So unfortunately, I can't talk about that now, because they're eating up our time. We got to talk about #save Star Trek Prodigy. And Dave, thank you for the challenge. I'll have to double down on how often I say #save Star Trek Prodigy to make sure that I got to get to the point. I need someone in the live audience to comment like, okay, Fatheree, we get it. It's starting to be obnoxious now, but
only then.
Because I need people in the Paramount offices to be like, wow, like, this blowhard in Texas will not shut up. He's really giving us a hard time about this Nickelodeon show he likes. Yeah, all that out of the way. Let's talk about some goddamn strange new worlds, Dave.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So I'm just going to quickly recap this episode per Tex-Trek tradition by reading the official synopsis, and then I'll kind of expand on that with spoilers to give everyone a quick recap. But the official synopsis reads, La'an travels back in time to 21st century Earth to prevent an attack which will alter humanity's future history and bring her face to face with her own contentious legacy. Let me say that again for the podcast. With her own contentious legacy. Sorry, it's been a long week. I'm not going to talk well, but that's what you get when you're watching live entertainment. Sometimes it's real life live. But
what's the line from that war song? Sometimes I don't speak right, and yet I know what I'm talking about. It's a song.
What song is that? Oh, that should be like my autobiography. I love that.
It's a good line from Why Can't We Be Friends?
Oh, why can't we be friends? Like that one?
That's it.
Okay, I didn't know that was in there, but
yeah, look it up. I know. Good stuff.
Cool, that's awesome. Dave, I think it's my turn to do the first opening statement.
Sounds good.
But yeah, I'll try to be quick. I got a lot to say, but we'll delve into it in the course of the episode. But just my quick thoughts on it before we get into the breakdown. I'll cut to the chase. I fucking loved this episode. I loved it. Beginning to end. It understands the difference between today's world and the Star Trek future. It understands Kirk, one of my favorite characters in the entire Star Trek universe. It shows not only how great Christina Chong is as an actor and the great performances we can get out of her, but it was also a great showcase. This might shock people, but it was a great showcase for how great Paul Wesley can be. And You heard it, like, that's right. I was the biggest, like, Paul Wesley is not good at Kirk, person after season 1. And I gotta, eat crow and turn a full 180. It's not even like, it's like 360 plus 180. It's like, I got, what is that, like a 540? I turned all the way around and turned all the way around again to turn back to face this beautiful Paul Wesley performance as Captain Kirk. I wouldn't have thought it possible for me to change my opinion so immediately and so strongly, but here we are. I'll talk more about that, but I'm sorry, Paul Wesley, I ever doubted you.
Fatheree, I'll give you some credit. You were also, though, always saying you wanted to like it. I never doubted your sincerity on that. I disagreed with your assessment of his earlier performance, but yeah, I never doubted that you really did want him to turn it around.
And I'm glad that he did. And I feel so much better about the show that I already really loved. I like Christina Chong's character a lot more now too. I mean, like Lon Noonien Singh, I've never had a problem with the entire show, but she's someone who I guess I didn't appreciate that much, but I do now. I have so much more of an understanding and appreciation when it comes to her character. And we have some long-time canon concerns addressed. So, the canon part of my brain is kind of like, oh, we've been wondering all these decades why the eugenics wars didn't happen in the 1990s. But now it's been explained, so that was cool. The episode found ways to reference pretty much every other live-action Trek show. I see stuff in here from DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, so I liked that. I know I said last week that, I was really impressed with last week's episode, but, that being said, I hate to, throw out terms like the best or favorite or whatever, but I think so far, I think this might be my favorite episode of the 13 I've seen. This might be my favorite Strange New Worlds episode. I'm very happy with it. But Dave, what about you? What was your stance on tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow?
Before we dive into that, we should probably quick tip the hat to Joanne Robertson for her super chat.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Joanne, for the generous $10 super chat saying, have a drink to unwind for the... And I actually will. I popped open this beer, which I normally don't allow myself to have unless I'm taking a break from my diet. But yeah, just one 16-ounce Michelob Ultra is not going to have too many carbs in it, so it should be good. But,
I like when we can respond to a super chat, Fatheree, in such a specific way.
Yeah, for the people listening at home, I actually am literally holding a beer on camera. So.
Yeah. And in
Dave,
our earliest days of Tex-Trek, we used to have drinks sometimes on the show.
Oh yeah, when I used to hit the table and then I was like, oh, this is stupid. Why do I keep doing this? I'm such a sucker for traditions though, and keeping everything standard and uniform, But Dave, talk about. I promise I'll shut up now. Tell us about your thoughts on tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And I know you're not going to like this one as much as I did, so don't feel bad. Be honest with us. Tell us how you felt.
Father, you know how you tell me off camera sometimes that you like it when we disagree, even though I, as a people pleaser type person, I hate being the guy who's the odd man out. I hate disagreeing because I don't know, I feel bad about bringing people down and stuff like that. But I found this a very frustrating episode. We haven't talked about this at all, so Father, he doesn't know this. But yes, so what I really did like about the episode was the performances by Paul Wesley and Christina Chong. And I liked their chemistry, and I liked his depiction of Kirk, even though I find it strange that of his two major outings on the show, both are alternate universe versions of him. I assume this is more or less going to be still roughly how he'll portray Kirk. So, but it's just weird to me. It's an odd choice to introduce him with two alternate versions of him. But what was frustrating for me was that I felt like for half the episode, it kind of had a light buddy comedy, romantic comedy, almost vibe going on. And then there was this very serious stuff with bridge terrorism, a dying gunshot wound guy, whether Kirk's timeline deserved to live or Leon's. Should you kill Hitler when he's a kid? This is so many serious topics to the point of I thought it was actually a little overstuffed thematically and needed more focus. So I was liking almost every time they were sort of bantering and doing the stuff that sort of actually felt out of place with the episode. But I felt like it was a weird mix of an episode. And I also I thought that they were almost being too casual with all the serious stuff going on. There was also, so the Easter egg stuff, not too big for me. That's never really my bag, the Gorn egg stuff. I did love the clarification of the eugenics wars. I thought that was actually really pretty cool. But the rest of the time, I remember thinking it was just a lot of the choices struck me as a little weird, and I'll get into those some as we're going into the show. Anyway, Father, so you should be happy because I'm very much I'm not going to say on the opposite end of you. I didn't hate the episode. In fact, I didn't know what to think of it when I first watched it. I was like, I liked parts of that, but then I found some of it frustrating almost constantly. So I'll process it more as we sometimes do as we talk about it. But yeah, I'm not on the opposite end, but definitely farther away from you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that's great. I think we we set like a good example of how like, yeah, people, of course it's normal and okay for people to have like different opinions on media. And you know, it's we kind of talk more about like our feelings and our reactions to things, and it's not really like a thing to argue about. It's like, oh, like I really like Paul Wesley as Kirk. Oh, I didn't like it. I thought it was bland. It's like, no one's right, no one's wrong. It's just you know, just you can't
we don't
argue
have to get
with an opinion or with an emotion. You know, it's like I can, no matter like how much I love this, I can't tell like, well, Dave, like, well, I still feel frustrated when I watch it. So
yeah, as long as I think we're making I always think good faith arguments are where it's at, and I think Star Trek Next Generation was particularly good at showing that sometimes, where you'd have people differing opinions but still good faith, and you know, I'll try and live up to that.
True. That's the DNA of Star Trek. It's Kirk listening to you know, Spock and McCoy argue back and forth and having to figure out the truth in the middle.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But yeah, let's go ahead and get into our episode breakdown. But quick reminder, #save Star Trek Prodigy. Make sure that you are being loud about that. We're making movement in the Paramount offices, according to Aaron Welke. If you didn't hear me say that earlier, or if you did hear it, then I'm just reminding you. Please like Fatheree, and retweet the hashtag and what's up,
Fatheree, just as a reminder to folks, Aaron Welke is he showrunner? Is he one of the head writers?
He's like the head writer, like the I guess Kevin and Dan Hageman, like they're created as like the, you know, like the creators and like the they were more like the foundational part. I don't want to like, you know, I actually like don't know this. I'm under the impression that season 2 was more of Aaron's vision in the writers' room. I mean, like, we know him, so we can ask. He might be in the audience right now. He watches the show sometimes. So,
yeah. But yeah, like when he says that there might be some movement, that's someone to listen to.
Yeah, he's like he's one of like the most important people working on that show. Like, I'll put it that way. But yeah, so we open this episode with a little bit of La'an security officer slice of life. And I know people don't like the way I say La'an. Should I say like Lan? Like, I don't know. How do I say this? Like,
it's either Leon or La'an. I think Leon is. I think that's right.
Okay, it's like La apostrophe then A-N, like La'an.
Yeah, I think you're kind of okay with either of those, and I have without rewatching the whole series, I suspect that they've used both of those.
They do
from in character and all that stuff.
Like, I think Pike just has Lon, like rhymes with con.
It should have 2 syllables, I think. It's like Luhon.
There's 2 vowels. There's 2 vowels separated by an apostrophe. English is so stupid. It's unfortunate it becomes Federation standard. But oh well. But the episode opens with a little slice of life of La'an's, you know, security stuff. We basically see her do some good British sarcasm and talk about, oh, I didn't know that as a security officer I would make so many friends and everyone's always happy to see me. And you know, it's like a lot, like very much like dialed up the British sarcasm which Christina Chong can deliver very well. Speaking of her being British, by the way, she was in Doctor Who, and this is a very Doctor Who-y type story.
Totally. I like these scenes, by the way, early on. It's you know, something we don't really ever discuss. You know, like it didn't come up when Worf was doing his security or Yar, which is that sometimes you're often the bearer of like tut-tuts and chidings.
You're the bad guy.
You're the breaking up the fight person, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I have like friends in IT, and they were talking about like you have to be the bad guy sometimes, like block websites and stuff like that. So it's like I mean, that's network security, so not that different, right?
What do we see? We get to see
Palia,
Transporter Chief Jay getting into it.
Yeah, with who's credited in the end credits as a Denobulan cadet, who's like, the transporter stole my ring from my matriarch. Spock playing the lute too loud. Palia, I guess, like having that famously like stolen painting that shows up in like a bunch of movies and stuff. Like, oh, it's actually Palia.
Is that what that painting is?
I think so. Yeah,
that's fun. You know what was weird? This is no fault of the show, but her kind of stammering, changing reasons for why she had hoarded all of that stuff. I couldn't help but in present times be reminded of Trump interviews about his stolen documents. Again, that's not on track. It's not on track.
She's got the Iran invasion war plans.
Yeah, like her stuff is well, I guess arguably stealing from the Louvre would be kind of a big thing. But like, it's clear her stuff is portrayed lightly.
I'm pretty sure that document is either in Saudi Arabia or Israel right now. But just given who Trump and Jared Kushner have ties to, but I wish we didn't have to talk about our 21st century problems so much. But damn it, this episode is primarily the 21st century and our problems. So,
but Peleocene also, of course, does a little bit. It does a quick bit of exposition that's vital later, which is we find out that she has a place in Vermont.
And which was a bit convenient, but I liked her stance on I need all these valuables in case this no money socialist utopia doesn't last. It's like,
that was a very meta moment. It's pretty rare that Star Trek describes itself as a socialist utopia.
Yeah, I think it's the first time they ever said utopia. It was very tongue in cheek, as
Correct.
she said it. But
I like that way to do it.
If you've been around since before the Roman Empire, which we now know that she has been given this episode, it's like, oh yeah, you're used to, the world changes pretty drastically every century or two. I also really enjoyed the Mbenga stuff. I love that because Babs Olusanmokun is such a renowned martial artist. Like he's literally like won international championships in martial arts. So kind of makes you hate the bastard because it's like, man, like you're a brilliant actor. You're a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. You're basically like a brilliant actor and a professional athlete. And every woman I know probably is totally like in love with you. And a lot of men I know too. And it's like, man, like you just like, you won the birth lottery, I guess. But no, some people are just like super talented like that. But yeah, I'm glad that they're using his martial arts in the show. I like this more than like shooting up on Captain America's super soldier serum and
better way to let him do it.
Yeah.
Jill liked this scene a lot in our audience, and I see she mentions that he's branching out into ship's counselor like Bones and Culber, but with very different methods, which I like that observation.
It's a 23rd century thing.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, I assume there's a therapist on the ship also, but
sure.
It's just kind of just the role they give the doctors sometimes, going back to McCoy. Actually, going back to Piper and or Boyce, Dr. Boyce with
true.
Pike.
He used a little bit of his physicality to kind of impart a lesson where he did like kind of like a judo type throw, nothing really harsh, but he knocked her to the ground and said, I used your own energy or your own momentum against you. Just kind of a little, hey, you're kind of self-sabotaging here, perhaps.
Yeah. This kind of sets up her isolation, which I'll have to go back and watch season 1 and see if they hinted at this any there, if it's kind of a new thing. But yeah, it lines up with what I understood as her before, of her kind of being the loner, even if they never shed a light on it before. I don't recall them spilling it out like this before. But it tracks with what we know of her history. But it basically, I guess, like the stigma of having this last name, Noonien Singh, and always feeling, unable to be close to people.
As a minor thing, Noonien Singh is such a very distinctive last name. I kind of would have thought that somewhere along in her family history, somebody would have just changed it. I
mean, you would think that the obvious parallel that this episode is going for with, like the whole like Hitler thing, there were a lot of people with the last name Hitler. And then after the war, when everyone learned about the horrors of the Holocaust, everyone named Hitler changed their name.
Right. I think the only people who have it now are white supremacists who've changed their name. It basically became persona non grata. Now, as a story element, I kind of, like it. I think it's okay to be a bit dramatic. You could even say that, oh, yeah, somebody did change it, but then one of her ancestors years ago
I would like to meet her parents. I would like to see a story about her parents at some point.
Well, maybe somebody thought, hey, we got to live up, we got to acknowledge our history, and the name itself has also good connotations maybe elsewhere. So let's change it back and acknowledge history. Like maybe something like that happened. Who knows?
But I wouldn't be surprised if we learn more about her family at some point. In fact, I kind of assume we will. So, but she finds this displaced time agent, this temporal agent who's dying from a bullet wound. I love the attention to detail with some of the stuff in this episode. Like, oh yeah, she recognizes a bullet wound, and then later we see like, oh, she's really proficient with an old 21st century firearm and stuff like that. So, I guess she's a bit of an antique weapons expert, like Sulu was around the same time. But he hands her his little time travel-y device, so basically like, we can assume this thing, it'll protect you from any like paradox in the time changing timelines. He gives this to her and says, you have to get to the bridge. He's probably talking about the bridge in Toronto that we see later. And
sure.
I didn't realize this the first time I watched it. I've seen this, I think, 5 times now. But the second or third time I watched it, I'm like, oh, the Romulan, Sarah, who we're going to meet later, must have shot this guy because she's pretty trigger happy. But yeah, he's saying you need to get to the bridge.
I was actually confused about that a little bit, and maybe we'll talk about it more when Kirk gets shot, because I was like, oh, why are their injuries so similar if there's not a link to it, if this guy was just shot by her. But I had one or two questions about, I suppose, the temporal agency's overall goals too, which again we can talk about when we get to them.
Well, they're trying to stop her from changing time, right? Like,
stop. What do you guess? Is it Sarah? Is that
yes.
her name? Why did they use Leon specifically?
Probably because of her ties to Khan.
But why would you use somebody? That's like bringing in somebody who has like an emotional involvement in a case, and in the police or whatever.
Because it's a pretty big ask to send someone back in time who's not going to kill Hitler. So maybe if you send like Hitler's like great granddaughter, like she'll be the one who would not do it. Also, they explain at the end that time agent was like, well, you're the only one who could have done this, and it's like, yeah, she had like the DNA to get through the security thing.
See, that seems Institute. Those guys are from the far-flung future. If they can't open a door in the 21st century, I don't know what we're doing.
I don't know. I don't think he had like a ton of time to figure something out before he bled to death. So
I don't remember what all other episodes we've seen the time agency in. I mean, there's the same guys from DS9?
It depends on which group you're talking about, but yeah, this kind of pulls from all of them, which I thought was the brilliance of it. But in DS9, you have the Department of Temporal Investigations. Then in Voyager, you see what a lot of fans just kind of call it like Time Fleet. But you have the 29th century people like Braxton, who shows up in Future's End, parts 1 and 2, and then comes back in season 5 of Voyager in an episode called Relativity, which this episode borrows a lot from. And then there's also like Daniels in the 31st century, but these guys seem to be operating from earlier than that. So I would think like 29th century-ish, or possibly like a little sooner.
I guess I, as a viewer not particularly familiar with them, don't see any good reason to pluck somebody in this timeline to go do a job for them and not use their own agent. Why pick her and not any other Noonien thing? It seems dodgy to me, other than that it works for the story that's about to unfold.
And I think he also wanted to use Kirk, and that's when La'an says like, oh, I think that you're meant to help me. But she thinks like, because like this guy said get to the bridge, I'm supposed to go to the bridge of the Enterprise, which is where she does find that the wrong captain is there. Yeah, I mean, like if I was this guy and I was like, oh, look, if I can come in here, the time will shift, but I can bring this Noonien Singh girl over to, the legendary badass James T. Kirk. And if the two of them can't solve this, then no one can. So, I don't know.
It just seems like there's so many variables. I need way more convincing, personally.
There are, but I mean, that's...
Like, Kirk is known for being a kind of fly-by-the-seat-of-his-pants guy, and, like, you're hoping everything will go right. I
think it's very reasonable to put all your chips on Kirk.
Maybe it didn't work out so well for him ultimately in this episode.
It worked out for preserving the timeline. So
right, because the writers made it so, but they didn't convince me.
I think it was. I think you can trust Kirk and on Noonien Singh to take care of this, but I mean, and I like that Kirk has like this really famous reputation in the future, and like like all the shows set after TOS, they kind of like reference him with a lot of reverence and stuff, but also I love like his enemies also. Like he's an infamous figure in some circles, like in Star Trek 09 when Nero is like, you were destined to be a great man, but that was another lifetime, when he's talking shit to Chris Pine. And then here, like even like the Romulan Sarah, and she's like all excited about taking down.
She got to be the one.
Yeah. But the interesting thing when she comes onto the bridge is that we see, Spock is in command of a Vulcan ship, Kirk is in command of the Enterprise. So that's, it very clearly shows the problem with this timeline, both within universe and within the hearts and minds of Star Trek fans. It's like, oh, Kirk and Spock are supposed to be together, and now like, Kirk is unwilling to, help Spock fight the Romulans, and that's a little out of place. So I pretty quickly started to turn around on Paul Wesley's Kirk, though. Like this ready room scene was when I first started to like warm up to him. I'm like, oh, like I kind of like some of the things he's doing here. I guess like my biggest problem with The Quality of Mercy, for those who don't remember, was just like his performance came out as like very bland, and I had a particularly hard time picturing him being the same guy that William Shatner was playing in the 60s. And the reason why I accept his performance so much more now is, not only I found it much more, charismatic and engaging, but also like, oh, I can see the Shatner Kirk in him. And that I really appreciate that. But just the things like the playfulness, the cunningness, and the empathy and compassion that he has later when he's telling La'an, like, well, this 21st century woman, like, it must be frustrating to be, so close to the truth and stuff. Back when he thought she was acting in good faith and stuff. But I liked all of that so much, and the whole time I was watching this, I was like, yeah, Shatner would have done a lot of this stuff different, but I could still like see like his version of the character doing, even though I know this is like another alternate timeline. But yes, it is so much.
There was
closer.
Something I noticed in this about his portrayal was that he kind of does a thing where he has this slightly bemused look a lot of the time, a little skeptical, like, but it's not like his permanent personality. He can also be kind of very sincere in moments and, a little impulsive at times. And that all, I thought, was a pretty good reflection of Shatner's portrayal. It's, like you say, not an attempt to precisely emulate it, but reflect it for sure. And that slightly wry sort of skeptical vibe was something I thought that Shatner does, but that I don't think about too much, Anyway, I do agree. His portrayal definitely had that it.
Well, let's talk about the stuff in Toronto when we see, and I get why the Romulans wanted like that other timeline. That's the timeline you get if you blow up Khan in Toronto. You basically get like, there's no Federation, and the Romulans can just, they can fight the humans separately, they can fight the Vulcans separately. It's very like divide and conquer. Looks pretty good from a Romulan perspective, and I like that they kind of set up the Romulans as a threat there. But then, we cut to the 21st century, we cut to Toronto, and I thought it was a bold move in the writing. They don't have a tricorder, they don't have a phaser, they don't have a communicator. They have the shirts on their back and nothing else. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to do that. It kind of creates a dilemma where they have to just use like their wits to solve every problem, but it forces them to show off how great Kirk is at being a captain. And I mean, it's not super believable that you could like win enough money playing chess in the park that you can, buy that a night in that gorgeous hotel room and, bribe the American Border Patrol to go into Vermont and stuff. But I'm so happy and thrilled that they're like, no, like we're just going to rely on Kirk using his wits to do all of this. And it's like, he's just like that good. He's just that smart. He's that brilliant.
I think that they after the chess games, he says to Leon, he's he's like, it seems like I don't seem like a guy who's 5 steps ahead of everybody, do I? He knows that's what they think of him. And yet he is, right? Very clearly, that whole scene, that was the point of it. And I kind of think that guy who's 5 steps ahead of everyone, maybe he could have made that money. Kind of pull in somebody who had some money to throw around, who got caught up in it.
There's he was playing chess against like I don't know, like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett.
Winning the game was 4 steps ahead. Getting that money, or like luring in the rich guy, was 5 steps ahead.
But yeah, I mean, I loved that so much. But I liked a lot of the things that like confuse us in the trailers. Like, why is this Kirk? Why is he a captain? He has captain braids on his sleeves. Why does he have like this weird badge on his shirt? Why does he not know how to go through a revolving door and says he's from space? Like, we know he's from Iowa. So it's like, calm down, y'all. Just watch the episode. All that stuff gets explained very quickly. We have a fun little montage of them, getting dressed. And I like Kirk's wardrobe. It's like very, very Iowa. It's very farm boy. I would wear more Carhartt jackets like that if it got colder here more often. I like that they're able to steal the clothes because La'an, as a security officer, she understands security procedures when she sees them, and they put that little security thing that goes beep, beep, beep at the door in that other customer's bag to distract the security guard. So I like her using her skill set.
Let's not forget, there was their first bit of little sexual tension where she saw Kirk changing and got a little, had to do the awkward turn away thing, just starting to set things in motion.
Yes. I like that the episode, there's a lot of like showing off, pretty people being pretty, but they play to well, I don't want to say like both crowds because I know it's like more it's not that simple and binary, but yeah, they show off the pretty lady and the pretty dude both throughout this episode, which I think kind of helps.
And aside from any whatever physical attraction they feel, it's clear that the episode is kind of one of those things that's about them kind of coming to respect each other, enjoy each other's company, listen to each other's point of view. Like a genuine kind of bond does come out of it. It's not just, hey, we're pretty and we're together, let's do the expected thing and hook up.
Right. And it's a very hard thing to do. It's kind of a lost art in a lot of ways because we don't get like these many like single hours of television that tell their own story. But it's one of the most impressive things that when actors and writers can make you believe in an hour or less that two people go from total strangers, but they meet each other and then they fall in love. Like whenever you can pull that off, that's really good storytelling, in my opinion, because it is very hard to do. And I feel like some people like it, I saw someone, they thought it was kind of jarring. They're like, oh, it's weird. It felt rushed. Like they met each other and then like they kissed and they had like these feelings like all within one episode. It wasn't like drawn out over a story arc. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I'm like, oh no, yeah, like that was just normal for TV for decades. So it's right. To me, it's weird that you find that weird, but it's interesting.
But also, I think you can make a case for it even within kind of the bounds of Trek realism, because everybody knows that people under sort of duress, you kind of trauma bond. Soldiers do it. People in times of stress do it. And
like so DS9 season 6, when war breaks out and everyone's getting married, Rom and Lita get married, and Worf and Jadzia get married. It's like, like life is short. Let's do this.
There's a psychological case to be made there. And so that was not among my issues.
It was also fun to see like Toronto being shot as Toronto, and I know like the Toronto Trekkies really loved this. It was kind of like a celebration of their city. They show a lot of it off. Dave, like for us, it'd be like if they shot like an episode in Austin, and it's like, oh look, they're like walking around the bridge on Congress, or like
right.
Oh look, they're eating at Stubbs. Like the place where they eat, Lakeview, is actually like a really famous location in Toronto, I'm told. So it'd be like, if they went to like a recognizable like Austin place or something.
Wait, where do they eat?
I'm glad that
they had hot dogs, but was there some place else?
When they're hanging out with Sarah, they hang out at like this diner.
Right. Got it.
But yeah, like seeing them have like Canadian money on screen, I thought that was cool. Just like seeing like Canada being used as Canada and not used. Even, they get like the joke when Kirk thinks it's New York, but like I don't think much of Canada is left in his timeline. We know Toronto certainly isn't, but yeah, he does. I had never heard of a lot of the Canadian stuff.
There's something. I almost, on one level, I thought the Kirk from his timeline should be a little bit harsher than we saw here. That this more or less felt like the Kirk we know.
Yeah.
But I also, there's this trope in sort of genre stories where, if something went wrong, Superman could go evil, Batman could go evil, and all that stuff. And I kind of don't like that trope. I like the idea that Kirk is kind of resists it. If time can push back, then people's personalities maybe can push back.
Mirror Universe Kirk seemed like kind of a prick.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But what I was going to say is I guess I like that when he was talking to the Vulcans in the future, I think he was sincere when he said, "I wish I could help you, but the conversation is over." He was being pragmatic within his space, but I think he was also sincere. He's like, "I really do wish I could help you." He could have been harsher. So
he says like maybe another lifetime, which is what he told it's what the Romulan commander tells Kirk in Balance of Terror when he's like, maybe in another lifetime we could be friends.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Jill, for the $1.49 super sticker. Much appreciated.
Always happy to see Jill in our audience.
Are Toronto hot dogs a thing? I had never heard of that like being a thing, but I like that they're on like I'm a big fan of like wheat bread, so I like that they come on like wheat buns. It's a little weird to me that Kirk didn't. There's like some really good looking like German mustard on that hot dog cart, and it's weird to me like he didn't put any condiments on. He's just like, I'm just gonna eat this plain and dry. But maybe that's why he went back to get another one. I don't know, but I guess kind of the moral of the story is like life is gonna have like a lot of shitty stuff in it that you can't avoid, but sometimes it'll have like a good hot dog, and you should like grab the good hot dog when you have a chance.
In the comments, Stress-Free K said, when you're in a foreign city, it's easier to fall in love. I think there's also that's a solid little point there. Something romantic about it. They got and you just pulled up a picture, Fatheree. They're standing in front of a beautiful old wooden ship watching a sunset. It's that
is true.
It became a little romantic.
When you're that's I've had that. I've never thought of that, but I've certainly like had that experience. Yeah, like there's certain environments where just like it kind of heightens the magic.
I remember going on a school trip once and just being like hanging out with somebody for a few hours who I didn't really know well, and like kind of half falling for them in that time because we actually kind of got to talk in a way we never had in school. And we were out of town for some, I don't know, UIL competition or one of those things. You just get that sort of extra, you're in a focused period of time. You're out of your regular environment. You can actually talk a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's certainly a known phenomenon. Never thought of that before, but I believe it. But they do kind of have like a missed opportunity in the episode when they're spending the night in the hotel. It's kind of heartbreaking now that we know what happens in retrospect. But when La'an wakes up, I love that we see her sleeping in the bed. Like, oh yeah, Kirk, like he took the couch, he gave her the bed. Oh, he's a gentleman like that. But then like when she wakes up and she like, she wants to like walk over to him, and then she hesitates, and then we see he's actually awake. He looks up, but it's too late. Like she's already gone. That was like their like I don't know. That was their moment, and they missed it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I guess it's not something that would like weigh over in his head, but I'm sure it's something like La'an thinks about every day after this.
Right. But I think it's a way of them kind of showing that they get Kirk. Remember when we talked about what we want to see in the show, and I said I wanted Kirk to be like real Kirk.
Oh,
that yeah. Kirk isn't a womanizer.
Right. Yeah, like the pop culture who thinks Kirk is Zap Brannigan on Futurama because they've watched more Futurama than they've watched the original series. Which not to be gatekeeper. I'm not saying like you have to watch the original series to like Star Trek, but you might need to watch it to understand Kirk. We'll see what they do with him in these other shows. But what if they had him like? What if he was acting like when Chris Pine is drunk at the bar, hitting on Uhura in Star Trek 09?
Mm-hmm.
When Uhura's like, I can handle this guy, and he's like, you can handle me, and that's an invitation. When he's acting like that. Like, imagine if Kirk was, like, acting like that towards La'an in this episode, how terrible that would be. And what a horrific misrepresentation of... I mean, you could do that and be like, oh, it's just like an alternate timeline version of the guy. But, no, like, the way that he acts, it is... And I agree with you, Dave. You could make the argument like it's almost, like, too similar to the prime timeline Kirk. But he's such a good prime timeline Kirk, I don't care. I want this version of Kirk in my life.
I was thinking up until right at the very end, I was like, is he gonna somehow cross over into our world, or are we gonna get one of those weird things where there's two Kirks, or they're gonna merge, or
They're
something?
gonna give themselves their own Kirk.
It'll be like the double Riker.
Yeah,
but
there's two Boimlers in Lower Decks now.
But yeah, I appreciated that this is a Kirk who falls in love easily, maybe, who might, even in his timeline, is a little bit of a romantic. But yeah, who takes the couch, who doesn't push past boundaries.
And I guess like the one thing that we see in him that is from his dystopian timeline, or less utopian, let's say, because he makes the case like it's not as bad as you make it out to sound.
Right, he's like we found the stars and something like that.
We're doing pretty good. Like we conquered the solar system. Like that's okay. Like we're not reliant on aliens. Like that's kind of cool, right? But he does enjoy the pleasantness of the 21st century, like the hot dogs, and he's got like that Kirk confidence. He's cool and calm under pressure. But, when Lon's like all serious and she's like all business, he's like, well, we got like this little bar to go through in the hotel. And, he's calm under pressure. He's like, let me enjoy some of the pleasant stuff here. But that is when they get the debate, I guess, and I like that they shine a light on this, because a lot of times I think it would have been very easy to brush over this. But yeah, like that probably would raise some concerns about him. Like, wait a minute, like you're wanting to delete my entire existence, like everything I've known. But I love that she kind of wins him over, and it's not instant. It's a gradual process. He has to turn it over in his head a bit, but he starts to back off when she says that his brother Sam is still alive in her timeline.
I love that little moment of sort of humanity, and because the way he says it, that was very William Shatner kind of drops his voice softly and kind of becomes almost boyish at times when when he's like, Sam's alive. He almost has this innocent sort of moment, and I'm talking about Shatner's portrayal, but something that what's his name, Paul
Wesley.
Paul Wesley. He captured in that when he said that.
Did you watch The Ready Room this week, Dave?
No.
You should watch it, I think. Will Wheaton sits down with Paul Wesley, and Paul Wesley is a big fan of the original series and talks about, watching Shatner's Kirk and how he says like he's actually like constantly trying to, drop in like little secret mannerisms here or there for fans to pick up on. So
sometime I think it's when they're sneaking into the reactor type thing later on, the cold fusion place later, but it could have been a little bit before that. He actually says something in the somewhat larger than life way that Shatner does the da 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 kind of enunciation, and I thought he did a pretty good job of doing it without it without it seeming like he was doing either a spoof, and he also didn't do it so exactly like Shatner that it was just felt like an imitation.
Right, it felt like he's playing Kirk. It doesn't feel like he's playing Shatner.
Right.
I thought I was impressed when they arrive in Toronto and he says, my God, what have you done? And the way he delivered that, very 60s-ish sounding original series type line, it sounds, like sincere and honest and true and real for today. But it doesn't sound hokey. And I was like, well, like you can pull off like that dialogue and not sound hokey. Like that's I can see why they hired you. And I think when we talked about Equality of Mercy last year, Dave, I think I even suggested, and I remember being kind of ashamed to even like say this if I actually said it. I have to go back and check the tape. But I was almost like wondering, like, should they consider recasting? Which I don't like to beat up on actors' performances because I think that's the easiest criticism for people to make if they don't like, they're like, oh, this guy sucks. Or just, it's like, well, actors are, they work with the material they're given, and then they are directed on how to perform with that material. And, a lot of acting is extremely hard. And I think a lot of the average person doesn't understand how difficult of a job it actually is and appreciate like who can do it well. But I hate being a guy who like, beats up on actors like that. But yeah, I'm ashamed that the thought ever crossed my mind. Like he was obviously the right guy to hire for the job.
I did think that this was one of those points when they had like, played chess, had hot dogs, got a nice comfy hotel. And I was like, did they kind of forget that there seemed to be something insistent about the reason they're being here, and that a guy, she, just like within the last 24 hours saw a guy die of a gunshot wound, and got somehow shunted back in time in an alternate timeline. Like, I kind of felt that they weren't responding to the bigness of that, and that was one of the frustrating points.
You're the La'an in that scene.
Yes, I wanted someone to be making some plans. I wanted them to be saying, "Hey, let's see, how do we interact with all the new stuff?" Like when she was like,
"Yeah, let's write down everything we remember about the 21st century," and yeah, she wanted to be more proactive.
Yeah, and I can understand why later on, he'll say specifically, he's like, the best bet from my perspective, if I don't want my timeline to go away, is to enjoy this and do nothing. But, I felt like from her perspective that she really should have been kind of more on the ball and like, let's get a game plan. Let's start scanning the internet. Let's do all the things. Let's canvass it. Let's ask people if things have been going on in their city lately. I wanted something like that. I didn't necessarily need to see them doing all this legwork. I just wanted to show that they took the issue of their time travel things seriously. And so that was, and that really was kind of a persistent frustration throughout the episode.
Well, the bomb does go off, and I guess. It's weird with like this bridge, because I think the original intent is this is supposed to be the near future, or sometimes people say not too different future. Or there's the same thing. Which one is more future-y, and which one is more closer to not too distant future and near future?
I think they both convey the same thing. They're trying to tell you this is going to take some of what you already know and just push the timeline a little further, exaggerate it a little bit.
Like Black Mirror. Like everything on Black Mirror basically is supposed to be like, yeah, it's like 10, 20 years in the future. Not too far, but enough that like this thing that's not out now will be out.
It's also a way of saying, hey, it's in the future, but it's not the far-flung future, and we're not going to name a timeline so that, after 5 years it suddenly doesn't read as the future. You're like, oh, well, we lived through 2023 and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's a handy turn of phrase.
This bridge like doesn't exist in real life. So I was thinking like, oh, like this international bridge across whichever Great Lake is in Toronto, I forget. But this bridge to America doesn't exist in real life. So this must be like this is like 10 years in the future or so. But the Romulan lady says that it's been 30 years since 1992.
Right. So, that Aaron was mentioning that in the audience, and I did catch that in there. Like, they do actually give it a specific timestamp.
So I guess, like, in this version of how the temporal war has affected modern day, this bridge existed in 2022. But yes, they go to the bridge, like time travel man told Lon, and that's when they first encounter Sarah, the Romulan, but they don't know she's a Romulan. They think she's just a weirdo conspiracy theorist who does seem like a very like modern day person. I've been told this actor is actually from the TV shows Grey's Anatomy and also Once Upon a Time or something like that. Two shows I've never watched, but
she seems pretty young to have had like a very long career, but it's kind of hard to tell exactly.
Yeah, I would assume 30 something. But
I thought that her she felt to me more like once we got to hearing from her, and we know it was an act, right? But like I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. This is vibing like a 90s conspiracy theorist where it's kind of meant to be all fun that they're into aliens and conspiracy theories, and it's less of the anti-Semitic tropes and the Alex Jones and the Trump stuff. But I was still like, I don't know if I'm really looking for a sympathetic conspiracy theorist as a thematic.
That was my criticism, so I appreciated the reveal, and it repaired that for me. The other thing I appreciate in this episode, it bugs me when they give the Star Trek characters very contemporary sounding dialogue, partly because Star Trek tried for decades to avoid that and went out of its way to avoid that. It's infamous how like in Berman era Trek, like actors weren't allowed to change the dialogue or ad lib or anything. But the reason why I think that's important is because here, another thing I appreciate a ton in this episode is the Star Trek tradition of like, yes, like when these people come back in time, they're kind of fish out of water. They don't always get the lingo right. They don't know how to talk like modern day people. When she walks over to the Sarah with the camera and is like, can you make that bigger? And she's like, oh yeah, you mean like zoom in? And that's how we talk about when we're showing each other pictures on our phones and stuff. And they do a lot of that throughout this episode. So I appreciate that.
It's a good example, Fatheree, of how you don't have to make a big deal out of it. You can just have one or two minor snippets of dialogue show they don't quite get it. They might get the basics okay, but yeah, some of the colloquialisms they're going to stumble over.
Yeah, it's kind of like Picard season 2 got it right sometimes. Like when 7 of 9 was saying, "Oh, well, do you mind capturing an image with your cellular device?" That's like a real. It makes sense. You know, we understand why. If you're from the 25th century, that seems like the right thing to say. But, you know, from the 21st century perspective, it was like, no, that's a really weird way to ask me to take a picture with a phone, capture an image on a cellular device.
Yeah, it sounds like you could almost buy it if somebody was sort of speaking if English wasn't their first language, and they were sort of stumbling through it a bit.
But it is, you still see Lon using kind of her security skill set. She's like, oh, I can tell from the charring on this wreckage, this was a photonic bomb, and that shouldn't exist in the 21st century. Those weapons, aren't supposed to be around yet, and like all security stuff with her. She's not the jack of all trades that Kirk is sometimes, but her skill set, she's extremely good at security shit. So Kirk is good, I guess, at the Vulcan nerve pinch, which the prime timeline Kirk that we knew was, he said like Spock was never able to teach him how to do it. This guy learned. So I guess that's another thing to make them different. But
yeah, I guess that speaks to a world that has a somewhat more intense, more of a survivalist vibe to it. Yeah. His timeline.
Yeah, survival. Yeah. I mean, he's desperate in prison. The things he had to do to survive. They have kind of like this argument about like Kirk being discreet and whatnot, and how he says discreet as my middle name, and I loved her reaction about like, no, Tiberius is like the least discreet name ever. She's like, I've read your file, I know you have like some fucking weird middle name, and he's like, yes, Tiberius. And then I loved the joke, oh, what's Sam's middle name? Is it like Sam Aurelius Augustus Benedictus? And I was laughing my ass off through that. I love that. But if you're gonna argue about like being discreet, maybe not steal a bright red Dodge Challenger or Charger, one or the other. It's a sharp looking car, but I'm like, come on now, you're not being discreet.
That was a little bit of almost the Kelvin verse Kirk in there, which but, arguably that's the side of him that is from his timeline it came out. Kirk is not above being a little flashy.
But he still struggled with the car at first. You see, like, it took him a while to figure out how to get the keys and the ignition and, like, get it in gear and stuff.
They did a little piece of the action homage.
Yeah. I mean, like, he does much better here because driving a car in the 2020s, standard transmission and everything, is going to be much more user-friendly than driving a car from the 1920s. But right. I thought that was an intentional acknowledgement of, like, this guy he's not super used to modern-day cars. Obviously, like, prime timeline Kirk is because he had a different stepdad that he didn't normally have because his dad didn't blow up on the Kelvin because of Nero, blah, 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 blah. It all makes sense.
But he is kind of a quick, I think Kirk's always a quick learner, and pretty soon he was smart. He was doing some Tokyo Drift stuff in there.
Yeah, I don't know if he should be driving that well, like he's a character from Fast and the Furious or something. The whole thing with the cops pulling him over and then like letting him go, I would almost buy this as someone. I've been in the situation where you see like Kirk, in police custody from the cops in Toronto, and they have him handcuffed outside of the car and everything. Like, I've been in the situation in both the United States and within Canada. And I can tell you, like, from experience that the Canadian cops are extraordinarily easier to deal with and much more nicer and much more concerned about, being held accountable. At least when they're dealing with an American. I might have been getting, like, the special treatment because I had, like, an American passport. So when Sarah shows up and is like, that's this famous attorney from the United States. He's this big civil rights attorney who like goes after police unions and stuff. Like, I could almost buy like the cops being like, oh, we don't want to get into this. Maybe we should let this guy go, because he wasn't breaking that many traffic laws, right? He's just like kind of speeding a little bit, and
I think he did go up on the sidewalk. At least up one point went on the sidewalk.
Not when the cops were chasing him though.
Oh, maybe not.
The reason why I have to just flat out reject it is like, there was just a terrorist attack on the bridge. Any suspicious person is being held. Like, he has no ID. Like,
okay,
they're not letting him go.
Counterpoint, Fatheree. Counterpoint here is they're looking for terrorists, that type stuff, and a person just driving recklessly, like, I don't think is going to quite. That's not going to necessarily fall under terrorist stuff. They might just be like, we got to go and canvass for better things than that. I think they probably were just like, he's a drunk driver, and I'm like, and they're just like, we don't got time for drunk drivers.
Yeah, this American hotshot trying to impress this cute British woman with them,
right?
But yeah, Sarah kind of seems, helpful. She's like, okay, she's crazy but helpful. Talking about, the aliens and the governments of the world are at odds with each other, but they'll actually get along to maintain this conspiracy. It did sound like very like modern day. There are people who talk like this, unfortunately. The most famous one lives here in Austin with me and Dave. And
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. But
you know what? They were filtering it a little bit. She reminded me of Kat Dennings' character in the Thor movies. Part of it was like she literally kind of had the same like little knit cap on and slightly the same look.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, just minor visual similarity.
And I don't know, like later Sarah says everything I told you was true, but that's coming from a Romulan, so I don't know if I should believe that. I certainly don't think that Chernobyl and Tunguska and JFK were all like, Romulan attacks on, I mean, maybe they were, maybe like assassinating JFK slowed down the space race or something. And I don't know, that's possible, but like, we really don't know what she says is true and what isn't true, which kind of works.
Although she'll later say that the basics were true, like when she's been revealed.
Yeah, but is that like, that's still coming from a Romulan, so I don't even know if I want to believe that.
I sort of this is one of those things, I've talked about this sometimes when in time travel stories or any stories where we maybe find out some events in human history were like influenced by aliens or something like that. There's a part of me that really doesn't like those storylines concepts, because I'm like, we need to as a race like own up to the good and bad of what we do. I don't like the idea that we could be better if only some space aliens hadn't held us back. It's kind of weird and xenophobic.
Yeah.
But yes, it was coming from an evil space alien, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, like, that seems like something the Romulans would do. I just hope that it doesn't stay a part of Trek history that, oh yeah, maybe they killed JFK and he would have ushered in a golden new age. I'm like, no, that's something we did. Let's own it, even if we don't know exactly all the details behind it.
Well, we do know that there was a Romulan bird of prey on Earth in the 21st century, but it looks like a 23rd century bird of prey. And I thought it was so cool. And then later I was thinking, like, wouldn't it make more sense if it looked like the Romulan ships look in Enterprise, which look like less cool in my opinion and a little different. But it's like, nah, this is such a classic, iconic design. I don't know. Maybe like this went back in time or something. We don't know when these Romulans are coming from, or like how many of them are active on Earth. Or are they 21st century Romulans on 21st century Earth? Are they future Romulans coming back? We know that there's other people and entire temporal wars fought over this.
I can allow for them for that on a purely iconic level, because that classic bird of prey is such a good design. It instantly reads, we see that, we know, any Trek fan ever really knows, oh, Romulans, right. And that not just maybe it's Romulans, but yeah, that's real Romulans.
I guess the thing I'm still confused about, even after watching this 5 times, is that like the guy who she had on camera from the hookah bar or whatever, security camera footage. He was waiting for the explosion to happen, so he knew it was coming. So is he like, did he bombed the bridge, or is he like an Earth person trying to salvage this alien tech? Is he working for like the Noonien Singh Institute? Like, we don't really know. So I kind of wish that it would have spelled that out more.
Sarah wasn't doing all this on her own, right? She didn't literally blow up the bridge herself, right? She had people.
Right. It sounded like she came back in time to assist Romulans that were there, because later she's like, yeah, like, you know, my people are doing this, but they need to be doing even more because they don't know how big of a threat y'all are going to be to us in the future. So I'm here to do even more damage.
Right. So like couldn't that just be one of her people?
Yeah, it could be. I kind of wanted it explained.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit dangling. As long as she was expositioning, or you know, or the exposition could have come out somewhere else. I guess she did say a lot at the end.
But you know, because they don't have a tricorder, and they know that, you know, Kirk, it is convenient when he's like, oh, I remember my history now. There's a cold fusion reactor that's gonna blow up. Remember, that was like the first Romulan attack way back in the 21st century. So they got to find the cold fusion reactor. They got to find an engineer to build them a tricorder, something to scan for it. Which, you know, if you're from the 23rd century, that's like, oh, how do we find something? Oh, you use a tricorder. So I get their line of thinking there, and then that's when we get the very convenient, right when they're talking about like needing an engineer, they walk past a TV that's talking about Vermont, and she's like, oh, just from my perspective, yesterday someone talked about living in a bunker in Vermont in the past. So that all kind of lines up a bit too easily. But I love Carol Kane in this episode so much that I can forgive it. I can hand wave that away. But I don't know. What did you think about her inclusion?
In this, I thought it was fine. It's I was a little surprised that they decided to throw a swerve and have her not had done any engineering in her 1,000 years prior to that, since Pythagoras invented math. As a person who struggles with math, I did appreciate that line. But we know she's a person who gets bored, and, you know, it seems like this is, you know, kind of a little bit more in that time travel tradition of The Voyage Home, where it's like, oh, how do we know he did not invent it? You know, they may have inadvertently pushed her to be like, oh, I'm bored. Maybe I'll try that engineering thing, or maybe I'll get into math. And
you know what I wanted them to do, but I get like why they wouldn't do it, is what if she said like, oh, well, my husband, you know, he's not with us anymore, but he was a mechanic, and, you know, I lived with him for years, and I picked up a few things, and just like kind of like planted the seed, like, did Taxi exist in the Star Trek universe?
Wait, what are you talking about?
If she had like mentioned, like,
you're talking about the TV sitcom Taxi.
Yes.
Right. Yes. I was like, what? Yes, that would be a weird thing, a weird reach, but you know, of course, I love that show, so I'd probably back that.
If she just mentioned about like, oh yeah, I had like a mechanic husband in the 20th century, like that's all. Like, you know, if you wanted to assume that was Taxi, then you could. I mean, I wouldn't, but I would have appreciated the option.
It would retroactively make Andy Kaufman part of the Trek universe. I think he'd
Star Trek 3 would read very differently.
I think he'd appreciate the absurdism of it. But so what happens is, you know, what seems like, oh, well, very conveniently, she remembers that Pelia is around and she can go get her super engineering skills. But that doesn't happen. But basically what it does show is that Pelia is inventive. You know, she's her kind of bouncing around mind can still get you somewhere. She'll, you know, get you something. So it still works out. It just doesn't work out the way they thought it would.
I laughed my ass off when Lon knocks on the door, and the first thing she says is, "This is going to sound crazy," and then Carol Kane starts closing the door. Like, yeah, like someone like knocks on your door. Like, there's certain sentences like, "This is going to sound crazy," or like, "I know this isn't your problem," or, you know, things like that. It's like, this is not going to go the way I want it to go. But yeah, I mean, I kind of liked La'an having to like do like the speech of like, you know, you've seen like the good times and the bad times. I promise you there's like a really good time coming in the future. Mm-hmm. You just got to help me make sure that it can actually happen. And clearly, like, I know you, I know things about you I wouldn't know otherwise. So okay, I believe that. I got on board with it, and then I like the tritium from old diver watches from the 80s. I like, oh yeah, they're using like 80s technology to save the day. But that's a real thing. I didn't know about this. I knew there were watches that would like always glow in any low light situation. I like wearing. I'm a fan of watches. I still wear a mechanical wristwatch. One of the few people still doing it in the 2020s. But yeah, there was. I guess this would all work. It makes sense. I mean, we don't know cold fusion reactors. We don't know what when we build that technology, what kind of like radiation it'll give off. But that's the only variable. It felt very like 21st century technobabble, not like 23rd century technobabble.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. What was I gonna say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I just like the acting in this though, like Carol Kane being drunk, like, oh, I need a beer, and yeah. Kirk, he's kind of trying to like lay on the charm a little bit to her, but he's arguing their case too, and then La'an having to like kind of step up and be the one to like really sell it and sell the quote unquote Gene's vision of the future, the Star Trek future.
It seems like Pelia in any timeline is somewhat. She seems to follow her instincts as far as trusting someone. That's what led her to trust Spock previously, and to trust them now. It's like it seems like if she gets a good vibe for you, she's willing to back you.
That's a great point, Dave, and I think that makes sense for for a character who like your big characteristic, your big trait is that you're really old. You've lived for a long ass time.
Good at reading people.
Yeah, you've come across enough people. You'd kind of be an expert on people, which is kind of Guinan's thing, right? Like she had so much experience and wisdom. She always knew the right thing to say to people. Not the same thing, but kind of parallel to that, adjacent to it.
Yeah, they really do need to get her and the actress who played younger Guinan and Picard together at some point.
Oh, Ito Agaihure.
Yeah, I loved her.
I got her name right and Babs Olusanmukun's name right, both. And I was like, I'm not going to like brag about saying this name right. And I just broke that promise to myself. So couldn't resist the opportunity to pat myself on the back in front of other people. I know, that's terrible. Dave, let's talk about the romantic walk on the sidewalk. It was very like City on the Edge of Forever to me, but I don't know, like these actors, like their chemistry, like I totally like bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. I loved their first kiss. I loved Kirk, playing around like I've never heard of the Scarlet Letter. I've never heard of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I loved La'an's reaction, like calling him an asshole. Like, and then right before the kiss, I love composer Nami's music. I like how it's kind of like in that same melodramatic vein as the score from famous score from the original series. It's like, but I love like the little love motif that we hear a couple times in this episode. But what did you think of of this scene?
Yeah, among my issues with the show, none of it was this. It was all, like Rachel just said in our audience, their chemistry is just so good. I bought into it all. We knew that Leon was looking for connection, and she found it in this strange and stressful day that she just had, or couple days. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was buying into it. You know what? It's at nighttime, also more romantic. And this was, by the way, I got another real Kirk moment here, Fatheree. Kirk, we know, is a guy who knows history and stuff like that. He's learned, and they like made a point. He made her think he was a little bit of a doofus, but then he's like, yeah, no, I know the Old Testament. I know Hawthorne.
There's that playfulness, though. It's that Kirk playfulness.
Right. And I bought into all of that. So I was fully on board for everything here. I was only lightly disappointed that it got broken up by we do have to carry on with the mission at that point. He said you broke your promise. What was that reference to?
When they're arguing about the watch, and he's like, you should let me wear it. It's a man's watch. And she's like, oh, you just want to be in command. You just want to take leadership. Like I promise I'll let you know if it starts to glow.
Got it. Okay, fair enough.
Aaron in the live audience has a very nice $5 super chat and is saying, I wanted to walk by the watch in La'an's quarters and say, I've been looking for that for 300 years. Thank you for finding it. Nice. But yes, the watch does glow. They have found the location of the cold fusion reactor. They enter it. They find that there's some type of DNA hand scanning machine in the Noonien Seeing Institute. So, Dave, you might recall in the weeks leading up to this episode, I was thinking, I was speculating. Oh, episode 3, they're going to go back in time. We're going to finally see the eugenics wars. That's what I thought the episode would be. There's explosions. Some bridge is getting blown up.
Sure.
And I'm watching the episode. I'm like, man, are they ever going to have eugenics? Maybe there is no eugenics wars in this episode. And then here at the end, it's like, oh, here's Noonien Seeing Institute. It's like, okay, we're getting some con shit.
Yep.
But yeah, that's when the Romulan Sarah reveals herself.
Real quick, Fatheree, I just want to quick backtrack and say I did like it was really a meta joke when Kirk mistakenly calls her Sung. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. So we know this was has always been a slight point of confusion. And does it all go back to that wartime friend of Roddenberry's?
Yes.
Where he
guy in China he flew with during the war who he wanted to reconnect with.
Right. So, Noonien Singh, Noonien Sung were all sort of call-outs to that guy to try and get his attention if he could ever could. And so, yes, it is. But it is a slightly weird, confusing thing for longtime Trek fans. And Kirk was confused by it, too. So.
The other thing we were speculating going into this episode was, is it possible that Brent Spiner shows up? Because we know from Picard Season 2 that Adam Sung is very active in this time period. The last thing we see of him in Picard Season 2 is he pulls out that folder. He busts out the eugenics war folder that has Khan's name on it. And that episode was written by Akiva Goldsman. So it's like, it was Akiva Goldsman setting up something for Strange New Worlds in Picard Season 2. But when I heard Kirk make that joke when he mispronounces her name and calls her Noonien Sung, I was like, oh, Brent is not going to be in the episode, or they wouldn't have done this joke. If a guy actually named Noonien Sung is going to show up later. But I also liked how that tied into the plot, how that referenced, this guy has never heard of my infamous last name. So it wasn't just, a member berry for the sake of being a member berry. It actually had relevance to the story.
Right, and ultimately that'll help. That helps them figure out what's going on. What the differences in their world are.
Joel in our live audience says he was worried that Spiner would be de-aged for Baby Khan, and Brent Spiner plays a lot of characters in Star Trek. I don't think they're ever going to go quite that far. So don't have to worry about that.
That'd be a bridge too far. A bridge that needs to be blown up.
Yeah, that'll be a bridge getting bombed with a photonic bomb. But yeah, speaking of that, let's talk about Sarah and how, if you look at the timestamp of the episode, this is how much of a bastard of a Romulan she is. She shoots Kirk at the timestamp of exactly 47 minutes even in this hour-long episode.
Messed up. Yeah. But we do appreciate the call out to our 247th episode, so thank you for that, Sarah.
So, yeah, it's a synchronicity.
Good shot.
Yeah, because she's been stuck in modern day. She's been watching Tex-Trek on YouTube, I guess. She also watched the X-Files a lot in the 90s. It seems like. I'm waiting on this con guy to start the eugenics war. I guess I'm gonna watch. It's like The Simpsons followed by the X-Files and then Married with Children.
That's what broke her,
Sunday night.
She stayed to the very end of X-Files when the plots got really convoluted and didn't add up, and then that's why what broke her.
She should have bounced in season 8 like I did. I still have not gotten. I still don't know what happened in season 9, nor do I care.
Maybe even earlier.
Sarah is vicious. She's like after she shoots Kirk, she's just super trigger happy, shooting all kinds of people. And Snoopy McQueen, our live audience, with a very generous $5 super chat, says, "I am over Kurtzman Trek. They Canon changes the race of people. Spock has more emotions than Michael Burnham. I think I am done." I'm sorry, Snoopy. This episode was I really liked this one. It worked with me, and I don't really think there's much in here that changes canon. We've already kind of established that the way that Spock describes the eugenics war in the 90s and how it was the beginning of the final World War and the devastation of it. It's always been difficult. The Greg Cox novels tried to square that away, but it's always been kind of difficult. Like, that doesn't line up with the 1996 we see in Star Trek Voyager.
When our own lifespans catch up with Star Trek's lore, and it has catch up and past it 30 years ago, then and when Trek has already also established that timey-wimey stuff is a thing, there's whole agencies that try and mess with it, there's temporal Cold Wars. That's a bit of canon changing. I don't know if there's some other canon changes he's worried about. I'm sure there are, but like that's a bit of canon changing that I think actually serves Star Trek. It patches something over. They did it fairly neatly, even though I do think some of the plot stuff in this episode doesn't add up. But that aspect of it is something that works for me.
And I mean, there's basically two options with Star Trek. With how do you deal with the 20th century of real life not being the 20th century as described in Star Trek? You got two choices. You can either Star Trek's just like a totally different timeline with a different history, different events. It's not our future. Or B, you do something like this where you're like, oh, well, these events have been changed and pushed around, and there's been a temporal war fought over it, and these events keep trying to reinsert themselves, so they're not really going away, they're just being delayed. But we basically are in a situation where we have to pick one of those two routes, right? If there's a third alternative, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that Star Trek is so aspirational. It's so built into the fandom that we're like, please let us become this. Please let us become this. We're doing our best. That it's crazy if we go ahead and say, oh, it takes place in some crazy fantasy timeline that's not ours. We got to be shooting for Trek. Otherwise, what are we doing here?
And that's my case. It's always been important to me that Star Trek is our future. And I know it's going to be difficult if I'm still alive in 50 years when the hopefully it's the Vulcans, not Romulans, like when the Vulcans don't show up. But I mean, this kind of gives us a way out for that. Be like, oh yeah, First Contact just got pushed back another couple decades or something.
Sure. Yeah, if the eugenics wars don't happen for a while, then everything else might be delayed a little bit. But it seems like what they said is likely to happen. I've mentioned this once or twice. I forget what the context was, but in the Stephen King time travel story in 1963, which is pretty good, that introduces the idea that doesn't really get too much into real heavy mechanics, but is a little more almost supernatural, and that their time pushes back. That's a thing. If you try and change something small, doesn't push back hard. If you try and change something big, you might have a heart attack trying to do it, or get in a traffic jam, or get stung by a bee that causes you to have an allergic reaction. Any of those things could happen. I know this isn't the exact same thing, but it is kind of interesting to me, and maybe something they need to follow up on. Time pushes back is kind of a big thing to say in the Star Trek. Stephen King, it sort of makes sense.
Right. Or Doctor Who does that too, as Jill's pointing out in the live chat. And to me, I don't want Star Trek, time to be a conscious thing with its own wants and desires. But I mean, there's godlike beings that might be trying to push the timeline into the
I think you could say.
Or there's these agents running around these temporal agents.
I don't think it even has to have. I don't think it has to have an intelligence, Fatheree. I think you could say that. The natural flow of events, that sort of forward momentum, that's the standard for most people, except the prophets and stuff.
Right. It's like the current of a river. It's always going to be pushing in that direction.
It's the current of a river. Yeah, and it will always bend towards certain things. That's the nature of time.
Could you make a temporal energy dam that builds up and stores energy from the timeline trying to push itself back?
I think that's a cool idea. Yeah.
You could have my ship is powered from a temporal dam. I have an infinite power supply or something like that.
Right. But it's but it did cause, the timeline to come grinding to a halt at somewhere, and maybe form a temporary barrier so that time travelers can't move forward or past that dam or something for a while. You can play around with it. I'm sure there's stuff to be done.
If we weren't in an era of, streaming services slashing shows, which, speaking of which, hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy. I forgot to mention that as much as I wanted to, but yeah, I need to be more obnoxious with that. But just a reminder, everyone, to please keep that momentum going. We need to make sure Paramount doesn't forget. It's like when Picard's let's make sure history never forgets the name Enterprise. Well, we got to make sure that the Paramount executives never forget hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy.
And Fatheree, I'll just add one other thing in there. I know that not everybody loved Prodigy the way we did. We were special fans of it, and I do think if you didn't win you over immediately and you didn't watch all of it, go back and give it a little bit more time. Just go get a little ways into it, and I think you might be.
Well, you can't, because it's you can't watch it anymore. The first 10 are on Blu-ray, but there's no way to watch 11 through 20.
torrent it or borrow your friend's Blu-ray. But my other point is that if we start establishing that any Star Trek might get taken down, might get summarily dismissed like that, then your favorite show could be next. And so I think this is a good place to draw the line for another Picard reference.
Yeah. Yeah, but if we weren't in this era of, slashing shows, if this was, a couple years ago when there was green lighting shows left and right, I would almost be wondering, like, is this like a backdoor pilot for like a temporal agent? Like, are we going to have like a Time Fleet Star Trek show or something? People have been talking about that for like over 20 years. It could happen someday.
I vote against it, but, I'll entertain the thought.
I think it could be. It's not like a high priority on my list, but I think it could be cool. There's other stuff I'd rather them do, but I think it'll happen someday, just given enough time. Speaking of time, this time traveling Romulan is killed by La'an when she fights to not kill Hitler, not kill little kid Khan. The Romulan conveniently dusts herself like the vampires in Buffy, or like the Tal Shiar Romulans in Picard season.
That's what 1. I was trying to think of. Yeah.
Then we get like this conversation with Khan, which to me, like, I was kind of concerned going into this episode. I was like, man, like, how do you cast Khan? Like, Ricardo Montalban is such a tough act to follow, and I thought, like, let's just show him as like a little kid. Okay, that's the good way to like have your cake and eat it too.
Father, what if he had like a mullet of white hair?
Yeah, what if? I'm glad that they cast a kid who looks like he's going to grow up to look more like Ricardo Montalban than like Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, for sure.
But I almost thought like he was like too nice of a kid. I thought like Lon would come into this room to like talk to him, and like at some point, I almost want him like kind of like show like that asshole side of Khan. Like the way like he talked to.
That it was already developing even at a young age.
Yeah, or like the way like he talked to MacGyvers and Space Seed. I want like when Lon's like, no, I haven't come here to kill you. I'm gonna spare you. And he's, she sits down to like talk to her, and he's like, oh, how many minutes do you grace me with? No. Now you must ask me for permission to stay here in my room and be in the presence of my son. I was like, but no, he's not an asshole. He's just kind of like a scared kid.
I think we had to see how difficult it would be to kill baby Hitler, the classic moral exercise. She said, I was sort of glad Sarah phrased it the way she did, where she's talking about, if they stop Khan, they stop the eugenics wars. And after the eugenics wars, humanity flourishes, and that leads to the Federation forming. Is that the basic timeline?
After the eugenics wars lead into World War III.
Right.
And then after that, Zefram Cochrane makes us warp flight and things.
But apparently their predictive computers say, you kill Khan, you stop that chain of events.
Who else had a predictive computer? Was the Paramount executives who, like, there was like some software told them, like, here's the 4 shows you need to remove to save money.
You saying that they're like the Tal Shiar Fatheree?
Hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy. But as you were saying, Dave, before I obnoxiously interrupted you.
It's okay. I also don't like, I kind of don't like that. This is another sort of philosophical thing. The idea that we have to suffer through these really times of super trauma in order to become great people. Because unfortunately, history is actually rife with us forgetting tragedies. We can look all through human history and see terrible, terrible things that were done. Crusades, Holocaust, genocide of Native Americans, all of those things that didn't turn us into amazing people. And so I think it's a little ridiculous to think that this one is the one that does it.
Well, I liked how they addressed that though.
She says, or maybe it's just like happenstance or whatever. And I also can believe that because this one occurred at the right time, humanity's trying to rebuild, and the Vulcans reach out to us, giving us a real opportunity to put our faith forward. So I'm not like completely down on it, but it is something that like it's one of those philosophical sci-fi conundrums and things that sometimes
it's not just a sci-fi thing. It's like it is like an actual like historical phenomenon. After the Dark Ages, we have the Renaissance. Like that is kind of like the pattern that history follows. So I guess like the debate is like
but it's like I think it's rare. It's not so clear cut as that. The Renaissance was also the rise saw the rise of what would lead to like the Inquisition. And So it doesn't just like magically become better, and I think it's a little dangerous to think that it does. I think we always need to be kind of moving forward and not imagining that, the Holocaust, that we were like never again. Oh, the events we're watching right now in the world as fascism is broadly on the rise again, indicates that this lesson has not been learned. So, anyway, but yes, you as you correctly pointed out, and what I wanted to say is I did actually like that Sarah left it kind of a little ambiguous, saying maybe that's just how the dice tumbled out.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a good idea for Star Trek to, like, sometimes you just need to, like, ask the questions, not try to, like, have the answer,
That's fair. It's I want like a meaty discussion sometimes, not every episode, but some of them they can lean into it, but they don't have to always resolve it because these are such deep questions that they're almost unresolvable.
Yeah, and if the point of it is to, like, get your audience to think about shit, then it's better, to ask them questions than to spoon feed them answers.
Yep. I always want them to, to sometimes show that these questions are pretty difficult.
Well, we do get La'an back to the correct timeline and get one quick scene of Anson Mount before he went back to hang out with his baby and wife. We're getting a big Pike episode next week, so, we're going to get our Pike. But yeah, glad Anson got to have some away time with the family. But we see him quickly here and see Pelia and Una. Everything's back to normal. The Enterprise is fixed. I like how, like, in every timeline, Uhura gives, like, weird side-eye to La'an. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? She did it in both timelines. And Celia Rose Gooding, like, does that a lot in Strange New World Season 1. I've noticed, like a character will, like, do something kind of, like, out of place. And she always has, like, these... It kind of cracks me up, but I love, like, her reactions. But yeah, we see her, we see La'an go back to her quarters and then get, I guess, like, debriefed by another temporal agent who's basically saying, like, yeah, you're gonna have, like, I know, like, Mbenga told you at the beginning of the episode, like, you don't have to bear all this alone. I'm gonna tell you the exact fucking opposite. You have to bear all this alone. Don't share this with anyone. I kind of wish they had sent, like, a future therapist back in time to, like, here's one person you can talk to, but...
Yeah, for the timeline repair people seem to be so focused on their job that they really don't deal with anything but that very specific job.
She felt very, like, bureaucratic-y, like with the wardrobe and everything.
Sure. Fatheree, what do you think that they're going to do with that in the show? I know that they don't want the moral lesson to be sometimes you just have to bottle it all up in terrible agony and pain. I know they're not going to do that, but how do they get La'an to be able to be in a better mental state?
Yeah, I'm curious where this... They're setting up a story arc here with, she's in love with this guy who doesn't know anything about her, and she's not supposed to talk about the events. So I'm curious how this will react when we actually, like, meet Prime Timeline Kirk in the flesh. I loved, like, the conversation. Like, she called him, and, like, she just wanted to see him, to talk to him, to know that he's okay after seeing him shot to death.
I really liked that whole sequence. It felt very real. I've had those moments when I've, like, felt like something felt that way about somebody, and I'm like, I need to talk to them right now.
Yeah, you
not
need,
too
like,
often.
Like the instant satisfaction
or even pain,
gratification.
Or
pain,
like it could even if it goes bad, it's like you need it now, and you need to, like, resolve something.
Yeah, that rang true, and also what felt realistic to me was her just total breakdown, like, after the phone call. Like, you sometimes, like, you have, like, those conversations or something where you have to, do everything you can to hold yourself together, and then, like, as soon as you have the opportunity to let it all out, you just do, and just, like, the floodgates open.
We haven't seen her.
It made me feel so sad. It made me feel so sad for her.
We haven't seen, because we haven't, obviously security officers are almost always portrayed as these really, really tough people, usually kind of person who you wouldn't consider breaking, and I don't actually consider crying breaking, but that's the concept, that's the cliche, sort of. And yes, I don't think we've seen La'an have that sort of collapse like that. And I really liked it. It's terrible, but it was so well acted.
When she's talking to the time agent, and I'm almost going to cry now, Dave, just thinking about it. When she's talking to the time agent, and she's all, like, frustrated, and is like, I can't believe that y'all made me do this. Y'all made me kill to protect this asshole who's, like, he's ruined my life. Like, I'm always stuck with the burden of his infamous legacy. And I had to watch and she doesn't have a word for what Kirk was to her. Like, Like, it's not like her boyfriend, her love, her anything like that, but he was like the potential for that. That's what she
right.
She was cheated from even like having that defined. Like he doesn't even get to have like a place in her life that she can like
right.
This is your role in my life. Like she was cheated from that even.
I wonder if this is weird because we also live in the sort of AI era where people interact with chatbots sometimes. I've seen things.
Sorry, I think we lost Dave for a second there. But yeah, I've never been as concerned and invested in La'an Noonien Singh's character as I am right now. So it was pretty effective in making me like. It's not like I never gave a shit about her before. I always thought she was fine, but like I'm really invested in her now, and I want to see where the story arc goes. And we end with that lingering shot of that watch that she brought back, which I think that was meant to like signify to the audience that we're going to pick up on this thread. There's more here between her and
That's
Kirk,
an interesting point. Fatheree, I wonder if she might at some point, someone who's say telepathic like Spock, or who's Spock to Pring, might like catch the truth about what happened to her, like mentally through a mind meld or something like that, and then she does have somebody to talk to about it. I would hope something like that might happen so that she doesn't have to bottle it.
Yeah, if she gets a confidant. Pike didn't have that. Pike was telling Una. Pike told Spot. He was telling all these people about like his visions of the future. I like that. I like Pike's not a bottle it up guy, but La'an is. Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I got everything out on this episode. Any additional final thoughts before we go into the Gornegg section of the show?
I saw Jill and maybe Aaron talking in the in the comments and mentioning that this was a very well earned cry. I don't want to knock on Discovery too much, but it was kind of known for getting a little teary, maybe a little too often, and it has been known for that. And I do think like none of us are like. Nobody here is like, huh, that was so lame watching La'an cry. It was cathartic, I think because they felt it did feel like it was an earned thing. And I think that's all you need to do is just make sure to sometimes be a little sparing about it and use it when those moments have really added up.
Mm-hmm. I cried twice in this. I cried here when she breaks down at the end, and then I cried when Kirk dies and he says, "Say hi to Sam."
Yeah, you know what? I think that's about right for me too. For an episode that I kind of struggled with, there were still those two emotional points. I actually, and it might have been for me actually when he first says Sam is still alive, because it had that ring of like again that sort of boyishness that Shatner and Wesley both capture about Kirk when he's sort of emotionally sort of unfounded, and he just. He's just kind of real honest and raw. And so, his portrayal was really good. Great showpiece for the two leads, if nothing else.
Yeah, and either one of these actors could carry a show.
That's true.
As these characters.
And, I will say this. I think I wasn't 100% sure about that for La'an before. There's lots of characters that I like that are kind of...
seen that.
That are kind of supporting characters, and like I didn't need Chekhov or somebody to necessarily be able to carry an episode in the old show. It's okay to be more of a supporting character, but I think this showed what she could do.
Well, on that note, let's go into the Gornegg section of the show. And this is all the Easter eggs, in jokes, and continuity connections I thought were worth mentioning. Starting with the title of the episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which is actually from a poem in the William Shakespeare work Macbeth.
Or not a poem quite. It's actually something just
it's like
Macbeth's...
a speech, though.
It's a soliloquy.
Okay, a soliloquy. Okay.
Yeah. He says it when he finds out that like everything's kind of falling apart for him, and then he finds out that his wife, Lady Macbeth, co-conspirator too, is dead. And it's really a kind of a meditation from his perspective, even though he's the villain, arguably, of the piece. We've seen his slow downfall, and it's him reflecting on that the world is like hopeless, that every step we take is, someone step close, every moment is one moment closer to death, and that every, we're like people on a stage making a lot of noise, but our lives are meaningless. I don't think the episode, well, it did touch on some of those elements, but honestly, I think they just like the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow part.
We get a live-action Denobulan for the first time since Star Trek Enterprise. We've seen them on lower decks. We saw one in Prodigy. He was in command of that relay station the kids arrive at and accidentally destroy. But yeah, the Denobulan cadet in the beginning of the episode, there's that's the same species as Dr. Phlox from Enterprise. There's another count of Denobulan reference in the episode with Kirk's prison he was in, which is another reminder of like there is no Federation, like Denobulans are separate from humans and Vulcans, and that a human and a Vulcan would be locked up in a Denobulan prison. It's not really great conditions, or when you're having to make plomeek soup in the toilet. Another really fun one for me was the Mike Okuda's T-cars. They're kind of like L-cars, but they're T-cars. That's the interface that we saw in Star Trek Voyager in the episode Relativity. Kind of their future 29th century time ship. It's really cool. Like the graphics on the computers, you can kind of see like, oh, it's meant to like represent like a linear timeline, and you can kind of see like there's other like streaks and stuff around like this one central line, maybe representing like other possible timelines that could be created. Just a really fun attention to detail that impressed me. That they cared enough that they would like dig that out and use that in the show. And our friend Aaron, aka Geek Filter, caught this one, but the dedication plaque to the Enterprise, it actually says that it is a United Earth Fleet ship, the UEF Enterprise, which is weird that Kirk later says he was born on the USS Iowa. Like the guys making the plaque, I guess, didn't read that part of the script, but it was built on Luna, so there's a starbase on the moon. Which Kirk was saying like there's lunar habitats on the moon, so there's a 47, not just not only is it like episode 247 of Tex-Trek, and Kirk from this alternate timeline dies at the timestamp of 47 minutes in the episode, but on a dumpster in the Toronto alley when Kirk and Lon arrive in the 21st century, you can actually see the number 2247 on the dumpster. I think that was placed there by Akiva Goldsman himself, thinking like, oh, this will probably be discussed on Tex-Trek number 247 next year, so I better
that was really cool of him. I gotta say, I know it's hypothetical, but it seems like the most obvious thing.
Yeah, I mean, Akiva's a big fan of our work, and he can be a kind of like an annoying fanboy sometimes, and he means well, but he bothers us a lot, and he's like real chatty, but it's we try to put out a good show for him and good content. We're glad he's enjoying it and he's still following us, so thank you, Akiva Goldsman. The bomb was destroyed by a photonic bomb, like I mentioned. That's what they always said, like in Enterprise, they're talking about like photonic weapons, so I guess it's just I don't know, to me that kind of sounds like a photon torpedo or something, but it's maybe a early version of that technology. Kirk talks about making plomeek soup in the toilet, like I mentioned, in the Denobulan prison. The middle name talk, I really loved this detail, Dave. I don't know if you caught it, but in What Are Little Girls Made Of, Kirk mentions that he has a brother. Before we even see Sam Kirk in the original series, he mentions him earlier in season 1 in What Are Little Girls Made Of, and he says his name is
George.
George. Sam is his middle name, and only I call him Sam. And then we see Strange New Worlds. Everyone calls him Sam. No one calls him George. So I always kind of wondered, like, well, that doesn't make sense. But then we get to this episode, and La'an is like, no, nobody calls him George. Literally everyone calls him Sam. So, yeah, this is Kirk was, and I like that. I love that, actually. I love that detail.
You think in conversations that Sam was just shining him on, maybe just kind of trolling him a little bit?
I don't know, but I know, like, my sisters, for example, like, they don't know me as well as they think they do. So it felt pretty realistic to me. Like, I mean, yeah, they don't know, like, what name people call me and stuff.
Yeah.
But Later in Khan's room, this is maybe my favorite part of being back in the 21st century and seeing the chessboards. But there's a chessboard in Khan's room. So we know that chess is an important thing in Khan's life. He's playing chess as a little kid. He is a 2D tactician. In this episode, Kirk calls, this old primitive version of chess, this is idiot's chess. It very subtly foreshadows or references, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it, with sequels and prequels and whatever. But it definitely acknowledges the Wrath of Khan, Kirk being the 3D tactician with his, future, more advanced ways of thinking. I know it's like corny and hokey and be like, come on, Khan's never like heard of submarines. He's just like oblivious to 3D tactics and stuff. But, everyone loves the Wrath of Khan. It works in that movie. I love them pointing it out here. And it doesn't, beat you over the head with it. It's like, just for people like me who's going to like freeze from the episode and look for little things like that. I thought that was a nice touch. What about you?
I don't have a strong feeling about it. It's not the kind of reference I usually care for that much. I think that, like, if in the bigger scheme of Khan, like, once you kind of start talking about him outside of that movie, it's hard to imagine that this guy who is so brilliant in so many ways doesn't think rather three-dimensionally. I imagine that he is often 5 steps ahead, but, if you told me that in the heat of the moment, his ego, his narcissism takes over, and he kind of starts thinking just a move or two ahead, and kind of losing the train of it, I feel like he's probably actually more like that. Like, yeah, okay, he can think pretty deeply, but maybe not. Maybe that has always been his thing. It turns out you can do a lot of stuff as dictators around the world have shown us by just being cruel and thuggish. You don't actually have to be some genius, and Khan may have been particularly good at being cruel and thuggish.
Then I liked that also in his room he had the picture of his other augment classmates, I guess, or friends. They're all like little kids, but they're
is that like Joaquin and all that stuff?
Yeah, you'd think these are like the 72 people he had on the Botany Bay. They're all wearing like these red sweaters with like these white collars, and they had like these red jumpsuits in Space Seed. So it's like, they like wearing red, I guess.
But it also looks like when they took over the Reliant, it looks like they're Reliant jackets with the white collars, red uniforms.
Oh, yeah, when they're stealing, like, the Monster Maroon uniforms. Mm-hmm. And then Aaron also pointed out in the, I don't know, whatever you call that, like, Toronto's version of Times Square when they first arrived. But there's a lot of, like, really cool graphics and stuff on the billboards. Stuff that, like, they made up for
just
the
like
episode.
Mock ads and promotions.
Yeah. But we see Dr. Keeler, I guess a reference to, City on the Edge of Forever, just says it's never a bad time for a house call. There's a underbelly bourbon, carathanol, which I guess is like some fake medicine, proprietrolox. It all sounds like real stuff. There's a Three-Eyed Goat IPA, which, that sounds like a real like craft beer. Three-Eyed Goat IPA. I'm surprised that's not like a real craft beer here in Austin.
Yeah, what do we got? Thirsty Goat?
Oh yeah, that must be why I'm thinking of that, yeah.
The movie title, though, is I guess its movie title is my favorite.
Oh, what was the movie title?
Blood Train.
Oh, is that what that was? Okay.
Yeah, there was. You can see a little bit of whatever the slogan is on it.
Yeah. So
the train is bound for blood, or this train is bound for blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Good stuff.
Well, that's all we have for Gorn Eggs, but we love to hear what people in our audience think about these episodes. So, Dave, did we receive any subspace transmissions for last week's episode, Ad Astra Aspera?
Yeah, I've got a few in here. We didn't get as many on this one, and I think it was because everybody was kind of, rightly so, riled up about
they were
Prodigy.
distracted by the big news that came out Friday, and that's why everyone needs to...
What?
Hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy.
Hashtag save Star Trek Prodigy. Got it. But it seems like broadly the responses were pretty strong. Let's hear from a few of them. Let's see. Dan says, actually, you know what? I'm going to start out with Sohail from our audience and often a contributor who says, it shook me to my Star Trek loving core. And this was of course episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera, which was the courtroom episode.
Mm-hmm.
Dan says there's a lot more going on in this episode than meets the eye. One of my new favorites, a superb trial episode, even though it broke all my rules for what makes one of those great. That's kind of cool. I'd be curious to hear what he normally would look for in a trial episode, because apparently this one was able to break those rules and come out. Daryl Morrissey says, I thought this week's episode was one of the best in recent memory. True character development, terrific dialogue with emotional moments, and fantastic acting. True Trek. And then lastly, yet more praise from Billy Martin here. I think the name is pronounced like Yetidi Badaki, the defense attorney.
Oh, yeah.
Yetidi Badaki was a standout, great screen presence. Bring her back weekly in a new role on the Enterprise. Writers can embellish her backstory to make it happen. She can put the A in acting and in action. Tough, smart, and seemingly versatile. Very impressive. And yes, she really did seem to kill it in her one episode that she got. So.
Well, I think I've lost Dave. Reading the subspace transmission, sometimes you get hit by some subspace interference, apparently. So I do apologize about that. However, the show must go on. I want to point out that in the live audience, I see the news from Bingenium that the petition to save Star Trek Prodigy has just hit 25,000 signatures. I think the petition to make Star Trek Legacy a thing has 60,000 or 70,000 signatures. So let's get that Prodigy. That's great that we're at 25,000. Let's get it up as high as the Star Trek Legacy petition. Let's get 70K on here. That's great that we're at 25K in a week. So it took Star Trek Legacy a long time to get to 25,000. So we're moving faster along than they are. So the Romulans tried to come back in time and silence Dave.
That's all right. I was on the last message that we were covering anyway. So I think we're wrapping it up. Everybody agrees that Yetidi Badaki did an amazing job, and so some way, shape, or form, it would be great to see her again.
Cool. And yeah, I'd like to see her again. But speaking of things I'd like to see everyone tell us what you thought of this episode by leaving a comment on YouTube. You can reply to my tweets on Twitter. You can sound off on the Tex-Trek Facebook page or in the Tex-Trek Discord server. Links to all of that in the description wherever you're watching or listening. And I would also like to see everyone come back next week, because assuming Paramount Plus is actually going to release it, because, they set a precedent of promising Star Trek and then changing their mind, but assuming that we get Strange New World Season 2, Episode 4 on Thursday, Among the Lotus Eaters, we're going to talk about that. Thursday night, there's going to be a first reaction stream. Rachel's been helping us out with those, and she had a really great group of people talking about it last night. So people, subscribe to the Tex-Trek YouTube channel if you're not subscribed. You can catch those first reaction streams at 7 p.m. Central on Thursdays, and then Fridays come back for me and Dave to do the deep dive discussion, and we'll also have that, make sure that show is available wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek, and follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.